Hi everyone. In this tutorial, I'm going to be going through how to create multi-part aggregations using Grasshopper Wasp. We're going to be using the 002 multi-part aggregation Rhino file and the 002 multi-part aggregation Grasshopper file in the student package that was sent out. When you open the Grasshopper and Rhino file, the Rhino file is going to look like this, where we've got two basic components. The first one from our previous tutorials, and then I've modeled a second kind of smaller basic component that is similar in kind of language, almost like they're part of the same kind of family of components. And then we've also got the same kind of setup for these components, where I've got the voxels guide, the more detailed geometry, and then also the connection logics. The connection logics for these components are basically the same in terms of how they're being placed, although you can change them as you wish. So I'm going to go ahead and open Grasshopper now. And when we open Grasshopper, this is what the 002 multi-part aggregation looks like. Basically, it's generally the same sort of logics as when you're doing a single part aggregation. The main difference, obviously, is that we basically need to set up a second part. So we've got our first part here, the larger kind of component, and then we've got our second part that we've set up. So just the way you set up your first part, it's exactly the same as if you were going to set up the second part. The main difference is we're going to ensure that we're calling our parts differently. So I'm calling this part 2 and part 2 detail. This one is called part 1 and part 1 detail. So once you've basically set up your parts and your two parts, what we need to do is merge these parts so that Wasp knows that we're dealing with two parts. So we just use a merge component to merge those two in. And we're going to, as we normally would, plug that into our part input in the aggregation engine, and also plug that into the rules generator. So similarly for the rules, as you can see, as soon as we start adding more than one part, the number of rules that we have becomes infinitely more than if we were just to do one rule. And I'm just going to quickly create a list of items. And I'm going to get just so we can see which ones we're selecting. So you can see, out of all these rules, I've had selected just a couple of them. I've just got 8, but in total, there's a total of 100 rules. So one of the things with when you start to add more complexity with more components is to that, then we really need to look at what rules are applicable. So something that might be useful as well is if we start adding custom previews to our components, and I'll go ahead and grab some swatches here. So we're going to copy these two over, and we're going to go geometry. So our blue one is our kind of larger component, and then our orange one is going to be our kind of smaller component. So you're going to have to have a look at kind of what kind of connection logics you want, just like in the basic component. And it's a kind of a process of trial and error in terms of which connection logics work. So, just looking at it, I can tell, that's going to 68 might cause particular problems. Same with 48, etc., etc. So you do want to pay attention to some of these rules, and you can see, maybe in this instance, I might need to start to rethink how I design the components, where I make this a little bit bigger so I don't have this awkward junctions and stuff like that. So there is a bit of a extra complexity when you start to deal with this. One thing I'll note as well is it's going to tell you straight away the part that is in this connection, so part 2 and part 1, and then it's going to tell you 0 is the connection point and it's connecting to part 1 for connection point. So you can go back into here, into your parts, and you can also then look at the point lists and really see where these connections are, and then start to begin to change the connections and the component types as we go along. So then the process is basically the same from here, where we just need to start aggregating basically. So I'm going to turn this on, and we can see here as I increase the number, we've got those multiple parts. Now, to visualize the 2 different parts, I'm going to change this to these 2 colors just so we can have a look. So to visualize these 2 parts, what we need from WASP is a component called the WASP filter parts by name. So when we define a name, this is something useful about WASP. When we define the names of the parts, we can then extract those types of parts through the IDs of the name. So this component basically lives under parts, WASP get part geometry, and all it needs is we get our parts out from the aggregation engine, and then we get the name as an input. So if I hide this and then I switch these 2 filters on, you can see that we've got, the different parts basically. And if I keep changing the seed of these values, those distributions will begin to change. So then from here, what we can do is, if I hide this off again, we can bake that geometry out. So we just have the basic aggregation as the 2 kind of parts. So that's one way we can visualize it. Another way is we can then apply our detailed aggregation, like as we're giving it a more detailed attributes, and we can bake those parts out. So using the get attributes by name part, as we've gone over in previous tutorials, we can then bake the shells. And then we can also have a look at baking the second part's shells as well. So we just make sure you turn on this to see which is which. So in this case, these are my shells and these are my glazing elements. And then I can bake this shell, bake the glazing elements. And then if I turn render mode on, and I'm just going to turn this off. Disable. So we've got our different parts and aggregations. So yeah, we can add more parts. So you can just continually keep copying this out and introducing more parts. One thing is that the more parts you have, obviously, the more connection logics you need, and the more complicated and complex your the rules have to be. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to keep in mind if you are to keep introducing parts, that it is going to get more complex with the rule generator. And so you need to spend more time really consciously designing the connection logics of these parts. Great, so that's how you set up a multi-part aggregation using the rule generator, and then visualizing it through the WASP filter parts by name component, and then also extracting those attributes. And so if we wanted to, we can start also adding parts here. One thing I also will mention before we finish this tutorial is this this entwine and baking the geometry. Well, basically what this is doing is it's just it's separating all the different pieces of information that is needed to bake the geometry. So if you are to add say a third part, what that would look like is, say if we have a third part here, we'll have the geometry entwined. So we create a third geometry. So this is where all our geometry is. Then we'll have the names. So it's just collecting the names, and then also the colors. So then when you bake it out, it's just making sure that all of those pieces of information are grouped together. So just remembering that if you are to add more than one part that you want to bake it, then you can do that here. You don't need to worry about doing that here. All you need to do is start adding more of the part details based on what you've called it in the attributes. So that's how you do that. I will see you in the next tutorial.